Hi, my name is Kim Solga, and I teach on the Theatre Studies program in the English department at Western University. If you've read a bit about our program, you may have come across a course that I teach called Performance Beyond Theatres. And if you're interested in theatre, you might wonder what it's about and why you should care about it. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do in Performance Beyond Theatres, and I'm going to try to convince you that it's actually a really important class to take. Have you ever been out with your friends, maybe at a club or at a bar, or just hanging out, and you've noticed how you're all kinds of showing off for one another? Or maybe you have a retail job or a restaurant job, and your employer has a specific set of rules that you need to follow when you're dealing with customers. Maybe you even have a specific script where you need to say things like, "Would you like anything else with that?" to each client. Both of these are, of course, completely mundane examples of normal human behavior. But they're also examples of public performances that we stage for one another every day. And just like the kinds of performances you'd see in a theater, or watch on a stage, and then discuss afterward, they all make specific kinds of social meanings. We just might not be totally conscious of what those meanings are in the moment. But once you start thinking of yourself as a social performer on a public stage, you'll notice this kind of everyday theater happening everywhere, from hockey games to concerts to political speeches, even on Twitter or Snapchat or Facebook. Now sure, some of these performances are more obviously spectacular than others, but they all share something important in common. They all feature human beings enacting predetermined social scripts for other human beings, who then respond in predetermined or sometimes completely unexpected ways. The field of inquiry interested in these kinds of performances of everyday life is called performance studies, and it shares a lot in common with cultural studies and anthropology, as well as theater. And although the kinds of public social performances I just described are technically as old as human history, scholars only began to investigate critically what kinds of social work they do around about 1960. Since then, performance studies scholars have worked with thinkers in a variety of disciplines, including, for example, geography, urban studies, politics, in order to understand how public performances can be both coercive and mind-expanding, both potentially dangerous and potentially very socially and politically progressive. Think for a minute about the election of Barack Obama to the US presidency in 2008. Do you remember his acceptance speech on election night? It's on YouTube if you want to go check it out. Can you see the way it was staged in the open air in front of that massive crowd? Do you notice the wall of flags behind him as he's speaking? Do you notice his facial expressions? And what about how the cameras keep panning to the spectators, noting how they're crying or smiling or just looking at Obama in awe? Every one of these elements tells a student of performance studies something about the way this extraordinary moment in American history worked as a social text. That is, about what it was meant to convey to Americans at home, and also what it was meant to say to those abroad, whether they were friends or enemies of the states. Now, I love teaching performance studies because there are so many different kinds of things for us to look at, and so many different kinds of experiments for us to try out in class. Over the course of the term, we might look at sports events or at political speeches like Obama's, at public festivals, at the practices of something called dark tourism, and at a host of stealth interventions in public space. For example, those crazy Sound of Music flash mobs that were all over the internet a few years ago. I also love teaching performance studies because right now we're living in a moment when the stakes of public performance are particularly high. If you've been preparing to go to university, you've probably heard a lot about something called the creative economy. You might even be hoping eventually to get a creative economy job yourself in business or computing, or maybe something to do with the arts and culture. The urban thinker Richard Florida, who works right here in Ontario, has staked his entire career on something called the creative city, where creative workers congregate to make a better life for themselves and their families. Now, no doubt creative economies are full of benefits and offer something for all of us to aspire to. But ask yourself, what does it really mean to be a creative worker? Who's not a creative worker? How does the economy that we're living in right now expect us to monetize our creativity? That is, our public performance personas, our very imaginations. And what do we stand to lose as well as to gain from this process? I think these are really significant questions about our place in our world right now. They're being asked by scholars of performance studies all over the world, including right here in Canada and right here at Western. In fact, they're exactly the kinds of questions that we talk about and debate every week in Performance Beyond Theatres. I hope you'll join us.